Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics with a fun and practical project for you today. This is a Plum Easy pattern and template. I can't wait to show you how fun it is to make this really awesome pincushion. It's dense, it's filled with walnut shells, it's nice and thick. I can even put my longer needles around the outside. So much fun. You might recognize this kind of folded star look from when I recorded the videos on how to do both the round and the square hot pads from Plum Easy. This is some of my favorite projects to do. I kind of love that type of origami, precision folding and placing it in. And these are really practical items. They work fantastic in the kitchen. And Deborah Miller, who is the brains behind all this amazing engineering and products, decided to take the same concept and move that into a pincushion, which of course we all need in our sewing room. And I have multiples. I don't know if you do. I only had one in the beginning, and then I'd find I'd go to need that, and I'm like, it's across the room. And so I finally got another one. Of course, we all love our magnetic pincushions. They're wonderful for their magnetism. When we spill our pins, we can pick them up. But sometimes it's really fun to add some style and flair and be able to use some of our favorite fabrics to make a different type of pincushion. And that's what we'll be doing today. So as you can see, whether they're in Christmas fabrics, patriotic fabrics, or different just everyday fabrics, no two are alike, and it's a lot of fun. And this is a great gift to give. So when you get your Folded Star Pincushion pattern, you'll only need to buy that one time. It will include one of the templates, so you're able to make one pincushion. And once you've made one, you will not want to stop. You'll want to make more of those, and maybe even make one for every season, or maybe even every month of the year, or maybe those to give as gifts, maybe in your quilt guild or a circle of friends. There's a 3-pack interfacing template refill, and there's also a 12-pack. So those are available for you as well. And of course, they've done the same thing for the Folded Star hot pads, so that they know that once you're done making one, you can't wait to make another one. So we're going to dive into what this template is, how to use it, and you'll see how fun it is and how fast you can put together your own pincushion. You'll need just 3 fabrics. I have those laid out here. So let's just look at the pincushion itself. We start off with 2 circles, and we do 2 circles for the top just to kind of reinforce that. One is really technically all that you would need, but Deborah recommends that we use 2 circles instead of just 1. That's where all the pins are going to be going in and out of, and she wanted to strengthen the top of the pincushion. Our prairie points, so to speak, will be what's here. And then our sides, as well as our bottom, are this fabric here. So it's only 3 fabrics required to do 1 pincushion. The template we'll be using, if you look at your template, and we'll try to zero in on that from the overhead camera, I want you to notice how some of the wording is upright and some of that is reflected. That's because we'll be turning our templates back at times, and that way the wording is presenting to the right side up when you get ready to use it. So I know that looks like a misprint, but it was absolutely printed that way for a reason, and that's so that when we do turn the template back or even flip it over, the wording would be correct to you. So let's dive into our pattern. So much fun. Right away, she talks about the materials. Let's just talk about those as we're using them so we can dive into the fun. The first step is to prepare our prairie points. And I'm going to go ahead and show you 2 different options. I've done them both, and I really prefer the second option a little bit more. But let's just show you that first option. By the way, if you want to add some sizing to your fabric, even before you cut your squares out or after you cut your squares out, it's going to give it a little more body so that it'll hold the fold. We want to make sure that we're cutting our fabric out very precisely. So be sure to put a fresh rotary blade in your rotary cutter. I know we have 1 pack, maybe 2, and even 5. So if you need a fresh blade, go ahead and grab that. We'll fold our fabric with the wrong side together, being very deliberate to be having it stack exactly on top of wrong sides together. And give a good press. Don't be afraid to steam it. If you want to add sizing, that's great. Go ahead and do that. The first we're just going to bring these two ends together with a fold up, but we have found that if we kind of put our one fold down here and kind of put your fingernail there, it gives you something to pivot around. It seems to come out a little more evenly when we kind of bring them both together at the same time so that you can see if any adjustment is necessary. And I should have done that on my pressing mat so I didn't have to move it. Let's do that again. So rather than just bringing one side down and pressing, let me demonstrate that. If you just bring one side down and press it, when you fold the other side down, there might be a little bit of a gap, like there is. Let me see if you can see that. There's just a little bit of a gap. But if I manage them kind of both at the same time, side to side, I get a little bit of a sharper point, and we want a very specific point. So this is the first option. Now, years back, I did a quilt that had prairie points, and I was introduced to Susan Cleveland's Prairie Pointer. And I realized it's a fantastic tool for the same application. So this is what the Prairie Pointer looks like, the tool. And again, if you like putting prairie points on a quilt, this is a great tool to have. She has some really cool lined prairie points that give you an even more sophisticated look. So we have added a little bit of a string, so to speak. We just used some heavier weight rayon thread down here so that this is going to get warm, and you're going to see what I mean here in just a moment. Let's use another one of these. Let's fold it in half. This time we use the Prairie Pointer. We can make direct contact with the iron to the Prairie Pointer, but it heats up quickly, which is why we added this ability to be able to pull it back out and not burn our fingers. I've never been burned by the Prairie Pointer, but it does get definitely toasty. So this was something that is a recommendation. This is where the fold is. So with the Prairie Pointer, as I approach that, you can see that edge and that edge are right on the very sides of the fabric. And that point goes right up to the middle. So we just simply fold the fabric down over top of itself. And now I come in. I find using the Prairie Pointer that my points are even more specific. I like that my hands are a little bit further away from the iron. And once we pull this away, that way I'm not touching it. I can even just go back if I want to put in just an even stronger crease. So you'll prepare all of your prairie points the exact same way, whether you use the Prairie Pointer or not. We just want to have some nice, strong points. And I've done those ahead of time. So we'll just kind of bring those out. We need a total of 8. I got a couple extra here. All right, let's take these out of the way. Our next step in our pattern is to cut our circles. Now inside your diagram here, you have a semicircle. I knew I was going to be making a lot of pincushions. Obviously, I'm on a roll, right? I'm just getting started. So I used the heavy-duty freezer paper and a light box, and I just wanted to make a permanent template. It's a little bit easier for me to create that, and then all I have to do once I have that is just place that down. Let's pretend that was the top, right? Place that down, trace around, and then I just cut. So I thought that was, if you're going to make more than one pincushion, maybe something that may be worth it to you, trace that with the semicircle, flip it over the other semicircle, cut it out. Love the cut right freezer paper. Even if you're inclined to iron that down, you can do that, then it won't shift, and then you could just cut around it. Again, be sure to cut 2 of those, which I have done ahead of time. And now we get to start using our template. One thing we're going to be doing is we'll be gluing down to our template. So I know right away I'm going to actually grab an applique pressing sheet, or maybe you could use wax paper, aluminum foil, something so that you're not getting any glue on your crafting table. Maybe you're using a mat like I am. So I'm going to grab that. So making sure that we're not getting any glue on our cutting mat. All right, I have my Fons and Porter applique pressing sheet here, just something that's a barrier between me and that precious cutting mat. The first thing that we'll do is let's just study this. We're going to glue down both circles. And by the way, you just want 2 circles. You could put this on the top. You could put a white fabric underneath there. It doesn't need to be the same fabric. It's convenient since I had it. But this could be just a scrap piece of white fabric that you have. But of course, you're going to want to have your nice print on top. Notice how in the very center, and it's probably quite faint from the overhead camera, there's a little bit of a darker circle there. That's not a blemish. That's intentional. That's where our button is going to be. And I'm just going to actually darken that just a touch. Just a touch, so that later on, when we go to put that button in, I'm going to see that just a little bit easier. I don't want to darken it so much that with lighter colored fabrics, I see it. And of course, we have 2 layers, so I feel like we are safe. Now, Roxanne's Glue Basta is my go-to. The other smaller bottle is kind of what we started with, but I really love the 2-way applicator. It just seems to hold, it just fits really nicely in my hand. So the first thing we'll do, we're just going to put just a little bit of glue on here. This is not for structure. It's just to hold this in place while we work our way to our sewing machine in a little while. Now there's something inside the pattern that talks about, let's go look at that real quick. The first one's down, but the second layer is the one that I want to talk to you about. Inside this pattern, there is a reference to cutting the 2 5-inch circles from the top fabric and then marking 45-degree lines with a chalk or lightly creased line to the center of the circle. Basically, the reason for that step, and I kind of want to give you some options here, is that later on when we start filling in our triangles, it's how you're going to line that up. Now, knowing that I have a lighter colored fabric here, let me show you where we're going to be laying these out. Basically, on this line, and we're going to start adding this around. The idea of marking these lines is so that we stay true north to south, true east to west, and then these diagonals as well. If you are working with a lighter colored fabric and you feel confident that your friction pen will erase, and certainly try that on a piece of the fabric that you're going to be using, and you feel confident that those lines will absolutely erase away entirely, there's nothing wrong with when you place this next fabric on. In fact, I'll just do that real quick. Just lightly put that on. There's nothing wrong with drawing those lines right through the fabric, but you need to know and have tested that on the fabric that you have, because the center of this is going to show. If you have any concerns that the temporary marking tool that you are using will not fade completely, you do not want to take this approach. So I have tested this particular fabric with this marking tool, and it erased entirely, and we will do that together. So you'll see that's true for this particular one. But if you had any concerns about that, basically, if you can mark maybe with a chalk pen or some other type of temporary marking tool, you're just trying to get alignment. It doesn't even need to be all the way through the center. It's just for here so that you know whether this tip is to the left or to the right. Now, if you're not that concerned about it, you can just go for it. So let's just try that. Let's just not even do the marks, or they recommend kind of a creasing technique. And I'm just going to visually just try to look across and line that up. We are doing this in real time. So if you don't want to bother marking with that or creasing as the pattern is suggesting, and we just want to go for it, I feel confident about my position right here, setting the base of that here, and I'm looking straight across at that line right there. I feel pretty good about that. And I can see that I'm running parallel to these lines. When you put the glue on, we're just going to put a little bit back here, but I definitely want to have you put a little bit of dab of glue at that point because we don't want that coming up later on when we are trying to stitch everything down. So let's just add some glue and we'll set that into position. And I'm looking straight across. You could even lay a ruler down if you wanted to. And if you needed to adjust. So that's another possibility for you. That's why I love this ruler. We'll be using this extensively. This is the 4.5 by 8.5. Now I will just speed up our time, put glue on a couple of these. And we just keep turning 45. I'm again looking across. If I'm concerned about my alignment, I can set my ruler here, make any adjustments, and let's just keep laying these down. Now on this last one, this is different than the others. Do you see how the left side of this overlaps that? The left side overlaps. Here, we will make sure that we continue that. So we have to lift this one up so that once we place this in position, and I'll check that measurement, everything has the left side overlapping the one that preceded it. And that's the same all the way around. Let me double check that. That one might be just turned just a little bit. That ruler really works out pretty handy. I think that's my new favorite method. And we'll be using the ruler extensively anyway. So for that flap that you lift up, we're just going to put a little bit of glue on that one. Now next in our pattern, we will go and let's examine this right here. We're going to shorten our stitch length. You'll need a coordinating thread because this thread will be absolutely showing here. And we'll be sewing just about a 1/16 of an inch, maybe an 1/8 of an inch. But you want to get fairly close to that point because you don't want those points kind of flipping up. So we will be sewing quite close to the edge and you'll be pivoting. You don't want to go all the way down here. You're just going to pivot. You're going to sew here and just take about 1 or 2 extra stitches and then we're going to come down. If you have a needle down feature on your machine, this is where you want to go ahead and use that. I'm also going to grab a tool called the Precision Hold It Stiletto. That's going to help me hold any points down that might want to lift. So I will see you over at the sewing machine and let's go ahead and stitch our star down. Okay, before we get started, one thing I wanted to mention is once I glue all the shapes down, I allow it to dry, I don't know, 10 minutes or so and give it a really, really good press. Notice how everything's laying down really nicely right now. That's the only thing kind of popping up. That just makes it easier for me to stitch it down. And as you can see, and as I'm staring at this really up close, see this little bit of gap right here? That's one that I folded with my fingers. These are ones I did with the Prairie pointer, and you can see they're so closed, and I love that. There definitely is an advantage to doing that. We'll start off with a shortened stitch length. I have them about, and the pattern has a recommendation, definitely a shorter stitch length than normal, so that we're going to come here. Once you cross this and you're ready to go back down that lane, do not continue past this. That will work against you because later we're going to be moving our template back and we only want to come so far as to go down this track. So let's get started. There's no specific place you need to start You just need to be able to stitch everything down. So now we're ready to move on to the next step, and we'll actually be flipping this where it's the wrong side up. And I want to point out right away some bold lines, and you're able to see now some of the wording is right side up to us. Line 1, line 2, 3, and 4. We'll repeat the same step, but let's just start off with line 1. So we are going to fold our template back to that bold line, and if you'll have some fabric stuck to that, and you just want to be kind of gentle to pull that away. It's okay, and if the template tears just a little bit, it's not a big deal, but we're going to pull that back until I can see that bold line and just crease that all the way. And this is where we will grab for our 4.5 by 8.5, and I have my nice line right there. We are going to lay that dashed line directly on that edge, and we're going to trim that away. This is how we're going to prepare the pincushion for our next step. Now you can just work your way around. You can work opposites. It doesn't matter. I'll just work the opposite because that does say line 2. Maybe it does matter. Let's go with line 2. Let's follow the instructions, right? Let's go in sequence. So again, pulling that back, folding so we have a nice 90-degree corner right here. Let's trim that up, and we'll do this on all 4 sides, making sure we're good and straight. I like this dash line. It goes all the way. We're going to take advantage of that to help us fold our template just so. And one more time. And I can see now why it's, especially with that center circle, kind of important to have a really light hand with the glue and not get too glue happy, because then you're just kind of fighting that. You just want to hold those things in position long enough to get to the sewing machine to stitch things down. So now we have our template, it's a nice and square, and we'll move on to building out our corners. So we'll actually have 4 of these squares, and we'll be placing them right side together. And I want to point out something in the pattern so that it may, just to clarify, you're dealing with an 8.5 inch, let's just measure this with our ruler. Our 8.5 inch block is here. This part down on the bottom of the template is just extra space and it's not where you're lining up. When we look inside the pattern and it shows the square in that bottom left corner, they're talking about the block edge right here. So I just want to call your attention. Don't sit the square down here. Sit that square, that's your block edge at the bottom. And on the left side is here. This is where you want to have that. So I want to point that out just in case. That kind of confused me just a touch. Now you can either put just a dab of glue in here because we just want to hold that in position, or you can pin it or do a combination of both. The whole idea is we just want that to stay in position long enough for us to get it to the sewing machine. And this will help us maybe a little bit later on. We don't have things kind of flopping around because we're going to flip it again. I want to point out now, see this circle here. Hopefully you can see that. There's a dark circle here and a dark circle here. We want to sew only between those two locations at this time. And we will repeat that on the opposite side. But let's go ahead and just do one at a time. And if you have a machine with a needle down option, be sure to choose it. I might even shorten my stitch length one more time. I really like having that just more thread going into the project. This is a stress point, so I might even start ahead of it and back into it just a little bit in reverse. We'll fold this back. And give that a press. Now you'll be kind of back and forth, front to back, and this thing's going to want to flop around on you. You can either just put another little bit of a dab of glue out here, just a touch, or you could pin it. I like to get it out of my way so that when I'm working on the opposite side, that is not kind of moving around on me. So that's that side. So same thing over here. This is the block edge at the top, the edge of the paper. Lay that into position. Let's put a dab of glue. I really like that. That worked really well. Just to kind of hold that down on that edge so nothing is slipping and moving as I flip it over. I think I'll pin that too, just to be sure it doesn't take any kind of tuck. We'll flip this over, and again, from this point to this point, we will sew. I'm going to back into this again. So just like before, let's press this back onto itself. And even if you're inclined to just put a little dab of a glue, we'll of course be flipping front to back a little bit more. Let's just put that right there. Now, in order to add sides 3 and 4, we need to bring our template to our table, and we will once again, let me clean these threads off, we will once again fold back lines. This will be lines 3 and 4 this time. So line 3, we've already cleaned that edge because we did that before, so just lay that ruler down so that you're right over top of that. And now we'll be able to also clean off those two sections. So that's going to establish the edge that I need to be able to put this part on, and we'll need to repeat that here. Let's roll that back. Now we have this. For this next one, same. We'll put a dab of glue. Now this is going to be one is a little bit different because we get a chance to sew all the way from edge to edge. We don't have to sew from those two dots. So I like that very much. Let's pin that. So let's flip that over. Let's make sure that is definitely down. I think I'm going to pin that too. I don't want that going anywhere. So when we sew this one, this is our line right here, this dash line that we're going to be sewing down. And you can start right off of here and sew right off of here. So let's do that now. Okay, now we get to fold that back, just like that. This is so cute. Oh, what a great collection of fabric this is. Love this Riley Blake collection. Super fun. And then our last side over here, we'll repeat the exact same step. So I can just go quickly do that, and I'll be right back. I'll have that pressed. We're ready to move on to the next step. We're getting very close to having our pincushion done. All right, there's the top of our pincushion. Let's flip this over, and now we will square this up. So we know that this is our 8.5. We're going to square up the 8.5. So it doesn't matter really what side. I'm just going to cut right on that drawn line. The edge of the paper is an 8.5, so you're just cutting along that edge. So let's clean off our workspace. Okay, let me point out this next step. This must be oriented in the direction. Let's flip that over. Let's point that out. We're back here on the back of our pattern. Notice this line that's running this direction, just like this. If I have this oriented like this, this won't work. So I need to make, whether it's this way or this way, doesn't matter. We just can't have it orienting this way. So let's start with that like this. And we will fold this unit in half. And what they're pointing out here is we'll start sewing off and onto the project here. We're going to stop and you're going to sew on the miter line. That's one thing I definitely want to point out to you here, is that there's two lines. There was a dash line and there's that miter line, and you can kind of see it right here. We're now sewing on the miter line. You're not sewing on the black. You're just sewing to the left of that. So we're going to come in. We might even kind of back into that one. There's going to be a lot of stress on this point, and this point. You might even want to sew this with a shorter stitch length or sew it twice. But you can see that pivot point right there, and there's a lot of bulk. So be good to your machine. Don't go too fast there. Let's come in, pivot, and we'll come here to the miter and just sew right off. I'm going to go ahead and pin that so nothing moves. Might reinforce right there. I think that's a stress point right there too. Okay, there we go. You know, if you're inclined, you might even come back and sew back over that, you know, a second time, going this direction. It's, again, this is one of the stressor points of the pincushion. So that's just an option to you. I'll just do that real fast just so you can see me do it. We know our pincushion gets probably used in our rotary cutter more than any other notion in our sewing room. So we've done that on the one side. When you flip it over, so we just sewed here. If you just flip it over, I'm going to line this up again. We will repeat that, coming in here, stopping and pivoting and going down this miter. So let's go ahead and just do that now, where we're already on the close-up photography. One option that you have, I'm going to jump forward into the pattern. You can see there's two more things to do sewing, but you can see they kind of have these little bit of these dog ears. You can leave them in the pincushion. You can trim them away. I like to trim them away. I want to kind of reduce the bulk inside the middle of my pincushion because I want to fill it with a whole bag of amazing walnut shells that we have available in either the unscented, or if you love lavender, and this has real lavender, kind of those buds in there and lavender oil. It's amazing. It smells amazing. We want space to be able to fit an entire package. And so by trimming that fabric away, it just helps make a little bit more space for the walnut shells. So let's trim up the other one as well. So now that we have done this part, our next step is to bring basically the centers together, partially sewing this so that we have an opening to fill with our walnut shells. And we have, oh, that's fun. That's a whole nother fun thing. But let's focus on getting that center taken care of. I'm going to press the seams open now. You could have interlocking seams where they're kind of going in opposite directions. However you prefer to manage that. It's a little easier to think that through now. And if you are going to press it, do that step here instead of a little bit later on. I'm trying to keep my hands out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. Let's bring that together. You can pin that if you don't want it to move. And it's going to be covered with a button, so if it's not perfectly seam to seam, You've got some grace there because a button's going to help you cover that up. Grab a little bit of a thicker pin. Now, I think the easiest way to manage this step, let's come over here, look at the side. Put this out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. You just want to make sure that's stacked. I think it's easiest to start in this corner, coming over top of our miter, right on that miter line, pivot, and come here and stop about 1 inch to 1.5 inches away, maybe 1.25 inches. That has been the simplest approach, and we would do the same on the opposite side. So let's just make sure everything is nice and smooth, and let's go do that. It's a lot of fabric to get over initially, that little bump, so go slow. Probably should have backed into that, but that's all right. Now, while we're here, we might be able to just switch over to our other side. Oh, I just didn't need to unpin that center now, did I? Let's repin that and keep that together. That helps. But over here on this side, don't be afraid to kind of push the template and the fabric around. Everything is stacked on top of each other. Let's repeat that, those exact steps. This time I am going to start here rather than starting on that mound. It's a little easier on the machine. So now let's trim off those other two sides, reducing our bulk as much as we can. And you know, when you think about the engineering behind the template, I mean, my hat's off to Deborah Miller, just incredible engineering, such a wonderful pincushion. Now we get to turn it right side out. Once you kind of get it going, that's why you don't want to make the opening too small. For the first one that I did, my opening was too small, and it took me a little bit to get it turned through. Once we get the bulk of it, I'll grab my point turner, and that'll get all of those little nooks and crannies, all of those corners pushed out all the way to make space for our walnut shells. Now, before we put the walnut shells in, there's 2 cents. I can't wait to show you about the walnut shells. We have to put our top button on. But let me just keep pushing this all the way through. There's a button on the top, there's a button on the bottom, and you can see it's kind of tufted. We really squeeze that down. But if we don't put that top button on, we're not going to be able to add it later. Remember that template when we first started? It had that kind of faint circle, and I made it darker. That's the reason I did it. I'm now kind of looking through a darker area, and there it is right there. Hopefully you can see that from the overhead camera. That's going to be my target. I am using a doll needle. These are from Peacemakers. There's 2 needles in the package. I've just got one already threaded. And I'm using that heavier rayon thread, and I've even doubled that so that we don't want to lose control of that button or have our thread break, especially after it's been stuffed with our walnut shells. So I'm going to pop that through the center. And I've basically taken a length that was a little more than 3 feet. And I've just brought both ends through the eye of the needle. So I create this loop. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop that back through real fast. And I'm going to go through this loop. What that does for me is it avoids tying a knot that could eventually become, undone. So now I feel much more secure. So let's go right back up through that spot. It's a little bit thicker, but like I said, I don't want this to come apart later. And, we've done, let me show you some options we've done. We've done a small button on the top and bottom. We did a double layered button with a cute little circle and one with a star. So it's really kind of whatever you want to do. Maybe we'll go for the bigger style here. We'll just come there and there. Just want that to be completely secure. Go back up through that top one more time. And that's going to just stay off to the side for now. Now we get to stuff our pincushion. I highly recommend that you use walnut shells, sand, something with density. The last thing you want is to use polyfill. I've had polyfilled pincushions, and the moment I touch them to put a pin, they're off the table. They don't have the weight and density. The magnetic, there's a reason this is heavy. This is heavy. I can put my pins in there and that thing's not going anywhere. It's not sliding across the table. So for that reason, I love to use the walnut shells. Plum Easy offers the unscented or the lavender scented. Let's use the lavender scented. I love the way that smells. So this is a wonderful addition. It'll start making your sewing room smell wonderful. Grab yourself a funnel, just an inexpensive funnel. And we are going to put that entire bag of walnut shells in this one pincushion. So these are going to be nice and dense and heavy. This is 11 ounces of walnut shells. And whether you're using walnut shells, sand, whatever you're doing, you just want to work that into the corners. The reason I think I like using the walnut shells is I've used sand before, but I've actually, because of the weave of the fabric, the sand starts to work its way out. And these are a nice grind in that they're coarse enough that you're not going to see them start coming out of your pincushion the way I saw sand coming out of mine. I'm just going to keep filling this up and working this into the corners. When I come back, I'm going to show you how to close the opening. I will whip stitch that closed, and we'll secure the second button, and then our pincushion will be done. All right, I have an empty bag, and yes, it all went in. It's incredible. Now we're here. You can see the walnut shells are almost to the top. Lay one side down, tuck the other over, maybe a 1/4 of an inch. You want to have enough girth to kind of bring that over. Just like that. And I'm going to be using my longer clover pins just to go straight down, just to hold the edge down. While we whip stitch that. I don't normally quilt with these pins, but when I'm dealing with bulk or a project like this and I just need more length and a little bit stronger gauge on the wire portion, these are my go-to. These are clover. I'm using just a 50 weight thread. You could use certainly a 40 weight thread. And let's just tuck. We're just going to hide that knot. And we want to get this opening closed and closed completely. Otherwise, we'll have walnut shells starting to come out. So I need to whip stitch this closed. But with close enough stitches, as I said, that as we're moving and using the pincushion, we're not losing any of our walnut shells. So let me do that. So sometimes people ask me, how do I tie this off? Well, one thing we're going to do, we're just going to make a couple, 2-3 knots, just like this. And I'm going to dive kind of back, even more if you want, doesn't matter. We're going to dive kind of back through, almost maybe even out the side. And you saw me put in a series of knots. I pull it just a little bit tighter, cut that, and now that thread isn't back here. It's kind of buried in there. So that's one way to tie off. Now we want to kind of push around. See how we have this depression in here? You just have to manipulate the walnut shells. You can kind of smack them around. And this is that tufting process. It'll be a little bit easier once we go back down to the bottom and we have something to pull against on the bottom button. So let's pull that through. You see what I mean? I can kind of push here and push here, and that's how we can make tuft it. Maybe you want to put a smaller button on the bottom. Doesn't matter. And when you come back up, of course, it's blind. So you're just kind of seeing where the needle comes up and trying to just maneuver it so it lands in really either one of those holes. We go. And then we'll go back down. And we'll do that a couple of times to secure that. So tying off is always challenging when you're dealing with something like this. So one option that you might find helpful, once I go back down one more time, I kind of go down to the buttonhole and I'm trying to leverage this long needle out to the side. It can be a little bit awkward. What this is doing is going to put me actually underneath my button. I've gone back and forth enough times that I feel it's secure, but this allows me to have this rotation and to go underneath just like that to finally lock that in. And I kind of slide that needle underneath the button, slide that knot, excuse me, underneath the button just like that. So it's kind of an idea, one idea, and then just like before, I'm going to travel way out to the side, pull that, cut that, and now it's buried. And now we have a nice, secure, tufted pincushion. We have our buttons on the top and the bottom. And I love that even with our longer pins, these are the longer pins that I was using. If we put them on the kind of this outer a taller portion of our pincushion. Even when they're all the way in, they're not poking all the way through. So this is a super fun project, as you saw, and super practical. We all need pincushions, multiple pincushions even in our sewing room. Thank you for giving me a good part of your day. We would love to have you subscribe to our channel. There's so much coming your way and you don't want to miss out. I'll see you soon on another Shabby video.